I recently ranked every Drake song, and I thought it would be only fitting to also rank every Drake album. Now, I won't be including his collab albums, but just to get it out there, I think What a Time to Be Alive is better than Her Loss. So there you go. And I won't be ranking the Scary Hours EP because, well, it's like 3 songs each, what is there to rank? And I won't include Care Package because it kinda is just a collection of singles. But other than that, everything is included. Every single studio album and a couple of his mixtapes. So, let's get into it. At last, we have Honestly Nevermind. I doubt many people saw this as a surprise. When this project came out, I originally gave it a 2 out of 10, but I think it has slightly grown on me. It's not that bad. Still though, I don't think it's very good. Honestly Nevermind does have potential, but I don't think it's realized on here. It's mostly very basic house/dance music with poor autotune and poor mixing. Consistency is also all over the place. There are moments of tracks that sound good, but as a whole song, most of them just don't really work. Overdrive could be cool as I do like the guitar melody and the effects on it, for example, but some of Drake's singing here is just so... it sounds like nothing. It sounds like he's freestyling all of it, no clear thought put into a song, and it sounds directionless. That can be said for a lot of songs out here, and it's probably the biggest issue with this album for me. I can see what he tried going for, and I think it works on some songs like Text Go Green. I really like the vocal performance on there, to be honest, and the auto-tune on some of the lower scale vocals. And Falling Back is okay as well, maybe drags on a bit too long with some odd sounding parts, but it's a passable track. And of course Jimmy Cooks on the back end, switching up the whole album, it's a pretty good track. But overall, yeah, no concrete vision with this album in my opinion, bunch of bad production choices like on Tie That Binds and Currents, and overall, not great, directionless. Scorpion was gonna be originally last, but after coming back to it for this video, I've realized there are a few songs that are actually good, but the thing holding it back from being any higher is the runtime. 1.5 hours for a Drake album is kind of ridiculous. 25 songs is way too much for something like this. And yes, I know some people will say, but he split it up into 2 halves, rap focus side and R&B focus side, so that it doesn't get boring. Well, guess what? It still gets boring, and there is just some straight up bad moments when we get to the second disc. The second disc has some of Drake's worst songs like Jaded, In My Feelings, and the worst of them all, Ratchet Happy Birthday. It's some of Drake's worst work to date and maybe his least consistent album. But the reason this is above Honestly Nevermind is the highs. There are a lot of songs that I do enjoy on here. A lot. Emotionalist is one of his most underrated. That beat is so good. Is There More has a cool instrumental, and generally the first half of this project isn't that bad. Just can get a bit boring due to some of the production and unfocused rapping from Drake. On the second half, there really isn't much to praise aside from Nice for What, which is one of his best songs from recent times. And That's How You Feel is underrated for sure in my opinion. But some really bad moments in the second disc, some tracks on the first disc, and the runtime and consistency puts this album at the bottom 2. Alright, at number 10 is Drake's debut, So Far Gone. Now this is... It's interesting, to be honest. It is over an hour long, which brings it down a bit, and it really doesn't need to be this long, but for a debut album, it's not the worst thing in the world, I guess. Very clearly influenced by Kanye and 808s and Heartbreak, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when it falls so short of it, yeah, you could say that it's a bad thing. Lust for Life is such a copy of 808s, and I mean, we literally have Say What's Real here. The second half of this project is not that great in my opinion, some not so great tracks and a lack of good moments, but the first half is not bad at all. We have tracks like Houston, Atlanta, Vegas, which is quite catchy. Successful is a classic, even though I don't particularly love it, aside from the chorus. But we do have some rap-focused songs that are good. Ignorant Shit is one of Drake's best rapping performances to date, and impressive that he was actually able to out-rap Lil Wayne. And of course, there is Best I Ever Had, classic track, good writing, and rapping from Drake. So yeah, So Far Gone does lose some steam near the end, definitely, and it does feel like it's trying too hard to be something that it isn't, but it's a debut album. Of course, he isn't gonna get it right on the get-go, but even considering that, there are good moments here and songs to come back to. Okay album, nothing to write home about, but it's worth a listen I guess. I can see how someone would like it more than I do. Dark Lane Demo Tapes is the next project at number 9. This is one of Drake's most trap-focused projects, and that is probably why it's not that high up on the list. I don't particularly enjoy trap Drake, however, on this project there are songs I actually like. It's quite a short listen, only 49 minutes in runtime and 14 songs. Now I would say that this does play things safe. It's very inoffensive, which is to to its detriment in my opinion. There aren't many things to dislike here from song to song, however, rarely does anything stand out too much. We've seen way better rapping from Drake, even on some of his earlier projects we've seen way better rapping. We've seen more innovative production for sure, and more daring production, but there's nothing to really hate about Dark Lane demo tapes, I would say. It does have songs that it come back to, like Chicago Freestyle, which is great. Not You 2 is a pretty good cut with Chris Brown too. Landed is one of the cooler trap Drake songs, really cool melody here, and it's catchy, and all around there are decent songs. It's relatively consistent with a few S songs that I don't care for. I think if you're a big fan of trap, you're definitely gonna enjoy this project. I happen to not exactly love this type of cash music. I prefer something a bit more hard-hitting or drugged out when it comes to trap, but again, I can see how someone would enjoy this more than me. Not a bad record though, definitely. Some tracks to take away for sure. Certified Lover Boy. Oh boy, what a roller coaster. This project has some of Drake's lowest lows, like ever. However, there are some great cuts from it. This was such a hard project to rank because a lot of the songs are wildly different from each other in how they sound and also in quality. Like, you have Fair Trade and then you move on to Way Too Sexy. Like, how does that work? How can you drop off so much? The runtime is one of the worst things about CLB. I truly believe that there is an amazing 7-track album hidden in this. If Drake was more decisive and selective with what songs he put on here and what songs he cut, it would have been a lot better. Due to its runtime, it gets boring because there are misses on here. Like, you gotta go crazy for me to enjoy a 21 song album. And on so many tracks here, he just doesn't. Girls Want Girls is awful, terrible lyrics and terrible guest verse. Love All with Jay-Z is so underwhelming, and on the second half of the project, we have stuff like Fucking Fans, which is one of the most boring Drake songs ever.
It's my top 5 is Drake. If we broke it off, then you know it wasn't painless.
But then he comes in with some bangers like Into Deep, Pipe Down, Fair Trade. Champagne Poetry has such a good sample breakdown, great rapping as well, such a promising intro, to lead us to nothing. Like, we get Girls Want Girls 2 tracks later. Yebba's Heartbreak is really good, Get Along Better, You Only Live Twice, a lot of solid cuts here with good production, but it's just too inconsistent for me to put it any higher. I physically can't put it above 8 when I compare it to the rest of his discog and how solid some of his other albums are. Really weird album, not because it's incredibly creative, because it rarely showcases much creativity to be honest, but it does some stuff really well and terribly at other times. Screw this album, it could have been so much better. For All the Dogs, Drake finally gave us his fat D. He teased us a lot and we had to wait for it, but we finally got it in the end. But no, in all seriousness, this is Drake's most recent project and it's another pretty hard project to rank in my opinion. However, I do think it's better than Certified Lover Boy, which may be a hot take among some of you, but let me explain why. For All the Dogs does more in roughly the same runtime as CLB compared to CLB. It is a lot more consistent and actually one of the more consistent albums that I've ranked so far. There are low moments, of course. I mean, we have the awful 7969 Santa, Rich Baby Daddy, and Gently. All of those songs have some sort of offense and they are tough to get through, to be honest. But this album has arguably similar highs to CLB and is definitely the more consistent project. I mean, the first half up until Screw the World Interlude, including Screw the World Interlude, I honestly really like that song. There's only one bad track, a track that is just kinda and the rest are good. The feature list on For All the Dogs is very solid, good features from Tizo Touchdown all around, a good J. Cole feature, SZA does her thing on both of the songs that she's on, Chief Keef does great on all the parties, Drake doesn't have the best verses to be honest, his writing has been a lot better and there are some ass bars on here. Like, I could do a compilation of some of the bad lyrics on here, but there's some really solid songs on here and some of Drake's best in this decade. We have Slime You Out, which is great, 8 AM in Charlotte, which is one of Drake's best instrumentals in the past few years, I Don't Give a Fuck with Yeet is not a highlight for Drake, but the beat is so good and Yeet does so well as well. All around, it's consistent, I'd say, which is kind of impressive for a 23-track project. Of course, there are some duds and it's not the greatest thing in the world, however, for the most part, it's fine. And some songs where Drake does experiment a bit, like on Calling For You, sound pretty good. So yeah, this is decent. Views places in number 6 on my list, barely missing out on the top 5, which may be a hot take. But honestly, I feel like there's better Drake records. There's a running theme so far with the albums being long, and this is a long album as well, and arguably not as consistent as For All the Dogs. However, the highs on this project are pretty high. It's a bit of a different sound from Drake. It's a dancehall project at its core, but it's not just that. But aside from Honestly Nevermind, this is probably his least hip-hop album. How does this turn out for Drake? There are for sure some boring songs and views. The middle section of the album is really forgettable to me, like With You, Faithful, and Still Here are really boring to me. And there are a couple of other tracks that I find to be boring or a bit too commercial. But there is a reason that this album places at 6th. The highs can be very, very high. The writing is decent from Drake on here, and there aren't any songs necessarily that are poorly written. And some of the tracks on here are bangers. Keep the Family Close is one of his best intros. It's so dramatic and cinematic, it works so well. It's a very dynamic song, which you don't really see from Drake. But yeah, it's such a good intro. You follow that up with 9, which is a banger, nice instrumental. Feel No Ways has some really smooth production. Fire and Desire is one of Drake's smoothest songs. It's so sensual, but it works well, especially with the sequencing. And I feel like this album somehow picks up pace as it goes on. After we get to Controlla, it really switches into gear too. Controlla and One Dance are classic. Child's Play is quite fun. Pop Style is really dark and I love the energy from him on that track. Too Good with Rihanna is catchy as hell. And Hotline Bling as the outro is a classic. I mean, you can't really hate that song. Really good run of tracks on the back end that pushed this album up for me to number 6. Yes, Thank Me Later actually gets into the top 5 for me. One of Drake's earliest projects, but damn, there are a lot of deep cuts from this that I actually enjoy a lot. Compared to his debut, the writing here is a lot better. There are less boring songs and much less songs that are bad, quote unquote. Drake's vocals sound a bit better and he's left the whole 808 shtick in the past, and it kind of works in Drake's favor here. It's barely over an hour long, which doesn't follow the trend of long Drake albums, and it makes this a better listening experience. I would say if you're interested to hear Drake rap a bit more and some of Drake's better verses and bars, this is an album that you could go to. It opens up with Fireworks, which is decent, some good rapping from Drake, and after a couple of songs, we get a classic, Over. Just the first few seconds of the song should let you know this is a banger. Do not mess with this track. This is literally incredible still to this day. And there's so many fun songs and choruses on here. Show Me a Good Time is underrated in my opinion. It's a very fun and catchy track. Up All Night with Nicki has a good instrumental and a great chorus too. I feel like Nicki brings it down a bit, but yeah. Fancy also has a great chorus. And then we get to the heavyweights of this album, Miss Me and Find Your Love. Miss Me is arguably a top 5 Drake verse. Both him and Wayne go crazy. Iconic instrumental and such a good hype song. Find Your Love is a classic, a beat by Kanye where Drake does his thing over it, and Thank Me Now is a good closer as well. This album for me is characterized by some of Drake's best bars and some of his catchiest choruses. Of course, a couple of songs I don't care for, but the majority of the songs on here, if you're either an R&B or a rap fan, you're gonna see quality in them. And that's why it's gonna place at 5th on my list. More Life is going to be at number 4 on my list. This is one of the lengthier Drake albums, and I actually think it somewhat fills in its length. More Life is incredibly consistent. I didn't realize this with my first listen, so I didn't think much of this album up until recently, but damn, so many songs on here are growers. There is quite a bit of variety on here. We have introspective tracks like Do Not Disturb, which is one of my favorite Drake songs ever. We have trap tracks such as Free Smoke, Fake Love, Portland. There are hard-hitting, hype Drake songs such as Galchester, KMT. There's a bunch of cuts on here that sound a bit exotic like Mad at a Rhythm, Get It Together, and we also have some really smooth tracks like Passion Fruit and Teenage Fever. All of the songs I just mentioned are good, and there are qualities to come back to them for, whether that be their replayability, their catchy choruses, the crispy clean production on some of these songs. You maybe enjoy this project for the hype tracks and the more trap-centered stuff, but what I'm saying is that this project is very versatile. There's a lot to pick out and choose for what you enjoy. There are barely any duds on here, to be honest. The only ones that I can think of are maybe Since Way Back because it drags on a bit too long, and Glow with Kanye, which is just terrible. But everything else for me ranges from tolerable to great and some of Drake's best songs. I mean, for me this project has 2 top 5 Drake songs, Passion Fruit and Do Not Disturb. I'd strongly recommend this project for someone just getting into Drake because you can see what kind of Drake songs you like and then go from there. This project has everything, plenty of songs to come back to, and is able to maintain its steam throughout the whole album. Top 3. Here we go, the first album from the so-called Holy Trinity of Drake albums. Rapping wise, this is one of his best rapping performances, but I wouldn't quite say it's his best. We're gonna get onto that a little bit later. This is Drake in his prime in my opinion, the run from 2010 to 2015. His production really hasn't been as good since. Some of the best instrumentals here are Tuscan Leather for sure, great use of the hi-hats, Furthest Thing has a really cool beat switch, Worst Behavior is so cool honestly, it's kind of repetitive, but I feel like it uses that to its advantage, and the auto-tune vocal sample throughout the song sounds so good. Hold On We're Going Home is such a smooth beat, the drums are punchy, and Pound Cake is literally like a top 5 Drake instrumental. That sample is crazy, the drums sound so big and the whole song is just grand. Definitely some of his best produced music, but let's move on to his rap. I'll take Pound Cake as an example again. He really tries here. I think because Jay-Z is on the song and he wanted to compete with him, but hey, he put up a good battle. Didn't quite out rapping, but he did good. The language, even though my favorite part of it is the chorus, his rapping is great too and works with how hard hitting the beat is. Even on tracks that I don't necessarily enjoy, like 305 to My City, Drake's rapping is not bad. It's decent. This album is a classic. If only a couple of the cut songs actually made it on the actual album, man. Oh, it would have been crazy. If they replaced something like Connect or 305 to My City, it would have been insane. And number 2, missing out on the top spot is gonna be If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. Man, I wish I was a Drake fan in 2015 because this was a surprise drop. I already know the second I would have heard Legend, I would have gone crazy. If You're Reading This, It's Too Late is characterized to me by its darker, moodier melodies, but also the rapping. This album has Drake's best rapping. Even though it's not number 1 on my list, it's still the most solid Drake has been rapping wise. Not only with his flow, but also with many memorable bars. Only a couple of features on here for the most part. He keeps it raw, and that's why I like this project. We have some incredibly hard-hitting songs such as Energy, where his rapping is so good. 10 Bands has really hard-hitting drums and Drake does so well on it. Same for No Tellin'. 6 God has arguably a top 10 Drake rapping performance on it. Such a hype song and so memorable. I think I know every lyric to it word for word, bar for bar. And really, I don't think Drake is this tapped in anymore, this locked in. On this album, he really hones in on his rapping and perfects it, taking it to heights which he hasn't reached again in his career. It's not anything crazy lyrically, but it's so memorable, and Drake's flows are good too. His cadence and delivery ooze confidence out. He just sounds like him on this album. He is him. The production as well, I mean, 40 and Boy Wonder really did their thing. The intro Legend has a cool vocal sample going through it, and it's quite a dynamic track. Drake's vocals are so good here. There's a slight hint of auto-tune, but it works really well. And Know Yourself. I mean, come on. Do you hear that beat switch? Like, that's crazy. Do you hear it? Madonna, it's so dark sounding and nocturnal. Company is so trippy and drugged out. Jungle, oh my god, there's so many songs on here. Jungle is one of his best produced songs, if not his best produced track. It has a paired up snare with the kick and it's so thumping, like oh my god. The vocal sample of the start that carries on throughout the song is so good and the track is really dynamic. Feels a bit empty, but that makes it even better. It's massive. This album has the most moody and dark sounding melodies out of any Drake album. I mean, just take a listen to Energy. Even though it's a hype song, that melody is dirty. Such a hard hitting album. Dark, some songs are quite progressive, plenty of bangers, and just Drake being locked in. But it's not quite enough to be number 1 for me. At number 1, for me, it just had to be Take Care. It may not have the rapping of If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. It may not be as versatile as More Life, but it's Drake's most consistent album, consisting of his best singing, maybe his best writing, some incredible production, and just in general, a very emotional experience to me. This is quite a personal pick to me. I don't think any Drake album even comes close to how emotionally connected I am with Take Care, because it's been one of the go-to albums for me during certain parts of my life. It's one of my most listened to albums. I mean, where to even start? There is hardly a miss on this album. The only song that I'm like, yeah, it's decent, is The Real Her. Everything else is top-notch and some of Drake's best music. Every song on here triggers emotion from me. Sound-wise, the project is R&B or pop rap, some rapping and some singing. Some of the singing highlights on here are a shot for me. Really nice vocals from him here. Take Care with Rihanna. I've realized Drake and Rihanna cannot make a bad song together. I love the way the song develops. It's quite sad but also very vibey. You can dance to it, and I love the breakdown part near the end. Marvin's Room, I mean, come on, it's Marvin's Room. How am I meant to stay composed? It's Marvin's Room. Iconic chorus, and Drake sounds like he knows what he wants to do on the track, if that makes any sense. Today he's just kind of freestyling some melody and it just doesn't sound good at all. Doing It Wrong is another song where his singing shines, and on practice he has some really smooth melodies. I haven't even got into that rapping yet. Headlines, iconic, top 5 Drake rapping performance. Underground Kings, Will Be Fine. Lord Knows, oh my god, Lord Knows is so good. Lord Knows is so good. The beat is iconic, the feature is iconic, Drake's rapping. All of these tracks I just mentioned are some of his best performances ever, and there are so many songs that I left out. I want to talk about the 3 tracks where The Weeknd is featured, because oh my god, that man turned into prime Messi on this album. Crew Love, I mean, first of all, the progression on this song is crazy. I love the blown out drums that come in every now and then. The Weeknd having 2 different verses over this mysterious sounding melody and background vocal chops from him, and then the song develops into a verse from Drake. So good. The Ride, oh my god, The Weeknd is so crazy on The Ride. Perfect outro. Drake raps good while The Weeknd's in a background, making this one of Drake's best instrumentals. And lastly, we have my favorite Drake song, Cameras/Good Ones Go. To quickly sum it up, this is a very personal song to me. I love the writing, I love Drake's nonchalant delivery on the first half, The Weeknd's contribution before the beat switch is so good, and the actual beat switch keeps the song from getting boring. Great vocals from Drake on the second half, breaks in between for The Weeknd to do his magic hat, and in my opinion, it's a perfect song. And that's Take Care, and it's the best Drake album. But yeah, tell me what you guys think. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? I would be interested to know. So let me know down there in the comments. What is your list? I would also be interested to know. And please make sure you like and subscribe. That will mean so much to me, as it'll help push my video and my channel into the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next time. Peace.